Okay, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is the wonderful world of umbrella. And of course, you have umbrella, personal umbrella, and you have a commercial umbrella. Now, let's get to what an umbrella really is, as far as an insurance. It's one of my terms that I think are, you know, a little bit misleading, I think, at the very least. Um, Here, the human beings ourselves, we generally, think in pictures. If I say the word dolphin, you probably think of a dolphin, not the spelling, or a whale, or a cat, or a dog, or whatever. All right. So we pretty much, all of us pretty much know what the heck an umbrella is, at least in the physical sense. Uh, the challenge with the word umbrella in the insurance business is several fold. The first one, and the most obvious one, is that the best way I can physically describe an umbrella in insurance uh, use is think of the umbrella as you have the handle and you have the frame and the spokes going out from the but there's no covering. So if you go out there with that umbrella with just the spokes and the handle, it's not going to do you any good to protect you from the sun, and it's not going to do you any good to protect you from the rain. Okay, so that's all you're dealing with when you start at the beginning, you know, of an umbrella. Now, what makes the umbrella of value is the coverages that are underlying the umbrella. So the way you can always tell, and you'll hear in the business another somewhat misleading thing is this umbrella is a follow form umbrella. First off, umbrellas aren't standardized, okay? So everybody's got their own umbrella, okay? So there's I don't know what the answer to that is. But at the end of the day, when I look at it, I say, I got to make sure that the underlying coverage limits are shown on the umbrella, quote unquote umbrellas declaration page or face sheet. Okay. So if it shows I got these underlying coverages and they'll require them to have a certain amount of underlying coverage limits, 300, 500,000, million, whatever. Okay, whatever the requirement is. So at the end of the day, the umbrella goes on top of those lines of business and only those lines of business. Now, some people say, well, you get some extra coverage with umbrella. Well, I can tell you my um, history with insurance companies has been if insurance companies give you something and they don't charge you for it, I don't know how much it's worth. Something's better than nothing. But on my homeowner's policy, if I have coverage for, gold bullion, that's great, except I don't have any gold bullion. So, kind of like me having a cigarette lighter in my car. I don't smoke cigarettes and don't really want anybody in my car smoking cigarettes. So that lighter is of no value whatsoever. And that's the difference between what we call features and benefits. I could care less what features are available, whether it's through insurance or car or something of that nature. I'm interested in the benefits. How is this going to, benefit, you know, me, myself, and I here? Okay. So the first thing on the umbrella is let's say, and it's always a rule of thumb, it's always a good idea uh, to have the umbrella with the same, hopefully, same carriers that you have as underlying. because there can be some kind of back and forth, you know. We're all insurance companies are all good guys and all friends until the claim comes along, and then what happens is uh, everybody kind of maybe runs for the hills, if you will, somebody else's fault. So, um, but let's use the business owner's policy. I'm a huge fan of the business owner's policy. Uh, it started in a limited fashion in the mid '80s, and 40 years later is, you know, really the backbone, in my opinion, of the small and medium-sized business owner. Okay, fairly idiot-proof, but not totally. Okay, and so anyway, within Umbrella now, there'll be these different endorsements, and they might endorse on. Let's give an example, um, cyber, or they might endorse on employment practices. It might be part of the BOP policy, even though in my previous thing on the talking about EPLI, I strongly recommend that they have for multiple reasons, have a standalone um, uh, employment practices coverage. Broader coverage, generally speaking, potentially bigger limits. Uh, don't like to have the losses embedded, defense within limits. I like defense outside of limits, wage and hour sublimits, yada yada. I'll go on and on of that. Okay, so when we look at this coverages, what are the main coverages that we're most likely to have? We're not going to have an umbrella go on top of a $50,000 or $25,000 EPLI policy. Haven't seen it, never heard of it. So if you think I got $1 million umbrella, you don't have that for EPLI. Okay, that's not in that you know situation, and the same thing applies uh, for the uh, um, um, cyber. Okay, all right, and we'll talk about cyber separately. Uh, there are several coverages though that, when they're put together, can be part of that to me are of interest and importance. One is the hired and non-owned auto. If you have that in your underlying limit and it shows on the deck page, there's a high likelihood that the umbrella's going to cover that. You're also going to have it potentially for liquor liability if it's maybe part of the BOP policy. Most likely not if it's standalone liquor. Same thing with standalone hired and non-owned auto, which you may have to get because some carrier won't do it. Um, Once again, only thing worse than beating dead horse, putting a saddle on it. But where you're going to run into hired non-auto issue, if you will, in the restaurant space is when there's a delivery exposure, and a lot of times the carrier won't even give you the optional endorsement, and then some carriers will give you one in X delivery. Um, the hired and non-owned auto, you'll hear me say it over and over, is an endorsement that everybody should have without exception. I don't care if it's the dental office or, you know, even if you got somebody doing deliveries, everybody's got an errand, somebody to run errand and everything else. Okay, so we look at the umbrella and we say, okay, our preference is to have it all with one carrier, so there's less disconnect, if you will. So as a general rule, it'll go over your business auto. It will go over your general liability, which would most likely include uh, products completed operations, could include your uh, personal advertising injury kind of thing, whatever. So it's good in that regard. for the BOP, and it's good in that coverage for the business auto as well. So those two are your main things that you're going to see on why you would have a interest in and need for an umbrella. Uh, the other you'll see sometimes in where you have workers' compensation, you can have employer's liability coverage B, A being the statutory, B being employer's liability. To be honest with you, I've never seen a claim in coverage B. I know there has been claims. I understand that. And I've never seen it ever get into the umbrella area. But if you have the work comp, just make sure that, the coverage B is in there. And that's really the only other thing you probably need to know about an umbrella. It's nice to have all the same dates and everything else. Um, but there's one potential situation, which is if you don't keep the underlying limit in force, or you have a different limit than the minimum requirements, the umbrella, unlike excess, has what they call a drop down, or it goes basically once your limit is, you know, underlying limit is fulfilled. However, if say you're required to carry $300,000 and you let that policy lapse in general liability, let's say, and or you have a different limit, say you have 100,000, that's a gap, and you would before the umbrella would come into play, you've got to meet those minimum limits. Now, if those minimum limits have been exhausted, you know, uh, through fire claims or something like that, there is a part of the umbrella, unlike the excess, which has what we call a drop down provision. And that's the biggest thing. You'll see these words interchange between umbrella and excess. Excess is generally speaking doesn't have the drop down benefit, and it also doesn't. Uh, it's usually for one line of coverage. So once again, while people may get all excited about an umbrella, uh, definitely in a commercial setting, 100% recommend the umbrella. And nowadays, and we're gonna since we're talking, I usually talk mainly commercial. I'm gonna talk about personal for a second. And here's what happens: if you have, and I'll talk about auto separately in a little bit, but if you have auto and you give me a choice between what we call split limits or combined single limits, like a, um, a business auto, and certain carriers may give you the combined single limit where the bodily injury and property damage come under one limit. So instead of 100, 300, 100, $100,000 per person, 300,000 bodily injury per accident, and 100,000 property damage, the combined single limit of $500,000, if you will, is flexible to go either way. But with split limits and also the combined single limit, putting the umbrella there is nice. And I'll give you a little side example that you could have a significant claim. I talk about this on the personal auto side with respect to a property damage only type claim. And you'd say, well, I've got $100,000 property damage. Well, it involves a commercial vehicle, diminution in value, high dollar cars, cargo, uh, you know, large trucking vehicles, whatever. You can have property and building. You can have property damage only, and then have a claim that can go beyond the 100,000 or the even the 500,000, and this is where the umbrella is of value. So I would say that between the bodily injury exposure and the property and or the property damage exposure, an umbrella with that exception makes sense on both a personal and a business side.